So today I'm with my very good friend, Judy. Hello, Judy. It's nice to see you.
Hello, Rachel.
Judy lives in Agen, which is in the southwest of France. And I've known Judy for 8 years now, because every summer I've been going, and for the last 5 years, I think, my daughter has been coming with me to language labs, which Judy organizes. We go back every year because it's so much fun. I started learning Breton. And then I possibly did a bit of Spanish, which, as you know, I'm trying to continue. I did some Chinese, some Latin. But Judy, we'll speak a bit more about that later. But I think my first question, and the question that people would like to ask you, is where are you from?
Well, that's the question that I never know how to answer, because my father was in the Navy, and I was actually born in Connecticut, New London, Connecticut.
So that's in the US.
Yeah. And it's a port. It's a submarine port, because I was born during World War II, and my father was a sailor on a submarine. And for most of the war, he was in the Pacific. But towards the end of the war, his submarine was sent to New London, Connecticut. And my mother went there to be with him. And actually, when I was born, my father was on a German submarine near Brazil.
Near Brazil?
Yes, because the Navy had captured a German submarine that was trying to escape Europe and take people to Brazil. And my father was part of the crew that brought that submarine back to the United States. And I was able to visit that submarine in Chicago, where it's now a museum exhibit. So I was able to visit the German submarine that my father was on when I was born. But we didn't stay in Connecticut. We then moved to another port in Maine. Well, actually, it was Portland, but my brother was born in Maine, where the hospital was. And then we moved to Key West, Florida. We've lived in Virginia, in Maryland, in Illinois. We lived in Southern Illinois, where my grandmother lived. And that was where we would go when my father was overseas on ships. And we moved to Washington State. We moved to California. We've basically lived in all the naval ports of the United States.
And do you still like the sea?
It is. I actually prefer a very, very big ship, because in a small boat I get seasick. But when we were in the North, people thought I had a Southern accent. And when we were living in the South, people thought I had a Northern accent. I never seemed to have a local accent. But also something that happened to me often, if I was talking to a person from the South, I would begin talking like them. And I remember once my mother got very angry because she had a Southern friend, and I answered the telephone and I was talking to her friend with the same accent as her friend. And my mother was afraid she would think I was making fun of her by imitating her accent, but it was totally unconscious. I just kind of picked up whatever accent I was hearing.
Perhaps you should have been an actress.
No, because I can't do it deliberately.
It just comes
It's,
out naturally.
it's totally unconscious. And when I do try to do it deliberately, it comes out all wrong.
So I'm curious to know, how did you end up in France?
Well, I wanted to travel. I wanted to travel like my father had traveled. And so I joined the Peace Corps.
Okay, now what's the Peace Corps?
The Peace Corps was created by John Kennedy, and it was a chance for young Americans like me to go to undeveloped countries and help in different ways. I was sent to the French-speaking part of Cameroon to teach English.
Okay.
Because Cameroon is a bilingual country. There are two official languages, are English and French. Because part of Cameroon was once part of the British Cameroon when it was a colony. And the other part was French Cameroon when it was a French colony. And so at independence, these two parts came together. And so the official languages are English and French. And I was sent to teach English in the French-speaking part of Cameroon.
Okay.
And so I was teaching in a lovely, lovely little town on the beach called Kribi. It was really paradise. There were white sand beaches, coconut trees, everything you can imagine. And I met a young man named Francois Dubois, very handsome young man who played the guitar.
I have a very handsome man. I wouldn't say a young man now, French man, who plays the guitar too.
So we married and had 4 children while we were living in Kribi. And so our 4 children were actually born in Cameroon.
So what language did you speak at home then?
Well, with my husband, we spoke French most of the time. With the children, I spoke to them as much as possible in English, but it was rather difficult because I was the only English-speaking person. I did have friends that would occasionally visit, and so my children would hear me speaking English with my friends from time to time, but mostly they would hear French. And when I spoke to them in English, they would answer me in French. So, but I do remember one thing. My son Daniel, when he was 18 months old, his sister Joelle was born. And we brought him in to see his sister, and he saw this little tiny thing wiggling on the bed, and he looked at it, and then he said, "Nose," and touched her. So he had acquired some English. But when the children were, Daniel was 3 and Joelle was 18 months, I took them back to the States to visit my family. And we actually stayed in the States for 3 months. And so they were hearing English all the time. But I was speaking to them in French at that point because my husband was afraid they would forget their French. And so I would speak to them in French and they would answer me in English. And one day I was telling Daniel to come downstairs and he wasn't minding. He wasn't listening to me. He didn't want to come downstairs. And I kept telling him to come downstairs in French and he wouldn't come down. And my brother said, Judy, speak to him in English so he'll understand.
And
Of
did
course,
he?
of course he understood. He just didn't want to come. He was being naughty.
I was going to say, children, when they don't want to understand, they don't understand.
Yes. But after 3 months, we went to France, where my husband was waiting to meet us at Geneva. And he came to pick us up at the airport, and we went to stay with his sister, who was living in France near Geneva. And he had a friend with him who didn't speak English. And at one point, Francois went shopping with his friend and Daniel in the car. And Francois left his friend in the car just to buy something quickly. And Daniel started talking to his friend in English. And his friend didn't understand. And Daniel kept getting more and more excited and crying and speaking to him in English. And his friend didn't understand and said, OK, ton père va arriver, ne t'inquiète pas. And finally, when Francois came back, they discovered what Daniel had been saying, and getting very, very upset was, I want to go to the bathroom.
Poor boy.
Yes. But after a few days, they switched back to French. And so at that point, I was speaking to them in English, and they were answering me in French. And I think children are very authentic. If they know that you understand the language, they will speak the language that everybody else is speaking. It's very difficult to get children to artificially speak one language or the other.
Or another, yeah.
It
I
has.
know my daughter, her English is almost perfect, and she's grown up totally in France. But with me, it's really strange. She'll speak both languages. It depends what she's talking about. It just comes out. But obviously with my parents, it would be in English, and with her dad in French. Yeah.
Yeah. It has to be honest with children. But I think bilingual children will not show off to show that they speak the other language.
Yeah. And how did you learn French? Did you already speak French when you arrived in Africa with the Peace Corps?
Yes, I learned French in school, like everybody. I fell in love with it. I thought it was a beautiful language, and it's often your first teacher. You know, I had my first 2 years of French were in high school. I had an excellent teacher who spoke only French in class.
Yeah.
She spoke no English. Even our books were all in French. Even the grammar was explained in French. And I loved this, but many students found it very difficult. And then we moved again. And this time we moved to Missouri, where that was where my family finally settled. My father had retired from the Navy, and he had a job at the local college. And I was in my senior year in high school, my last year in high school. And there, the French teacher was the same French teacher who taught at the college. And at one point, she was telling us about her trip to France. And she mentioned the interpreter who was their guide. And I was very surprised. I said, well, you didn't need an interpreter in France. And she said, oh, yes, the French, they speak too quickly. But fortunately, at the university, after that, they got a different teacher for the French class. And so I was able actually to take French classes with native speakers. And I got my degree in French from
Okay.
college. And so when I went into the Peace Corps, I went in as someone who had a advanced level of French. I remember my ambition was to be able to read Les Miserables in French.
I've never done that. I've seen the musical in English.
I
Go
did
on.
a lot of reading in French.
Yeah, and you found that helped. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. But
Okay.
but I think it was only after I'd actually lived in a French-speaking community that I could read it easily without using the dictionary a lot.
Especially books like that.
Yes.
So what made you want to organize this conference in Agen then with the language labs?
Well, it's a story I often tell. I hope it won't be too long, but I had organized an exchange with my school and a high school in Chicago. And so my students went to Chicago for 2 weeks, and then the other students came to us. And the following year, we organized it with another school where I didn't know the teacher. And one of the American students came to my advanced English class, what we called the specialist. And these were my very best students who had chosen to do extra hours in English. And when this American boy came in all by himself to attend the class, I thought it would be a good opportunity for my students to have a conversation in English. And I told them, you can just ask questions and, he'll answer your questions and he can ask you questions. I didn't specify the language because I assumed that it would be English. But within a few minutes, my 12 French-speaking students were asking this American boy their questions in French, and he was answering them in French. And they went on for the entire hour having a conversation in French, which was not what I had planned, but I was amazed at the boy's ability to understand and answer the questions. I was very, very impressed by this boy. And so after the class, when I saw his teacher, I said, well, he's very good. How long has he been studying French? And he said, this is his second year. And I said, oh, and I said, well, he must be a very intelligent student to have acquired so much French in just 2 years. And the teacher said, well, actually, he is failing all his classes but French.
Really?
And this amazed me. So obviously, this was not a brilliant student. And he had not been studying French more than 2 years. And so I became curious about the teacher's method. And that was the first time I heard of TPRS, teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling. And so he told me a little bit about it. I asked him to demonstrate it with one of my classes. And with the class, he made a story about a blue elephant. And I thought, no, this will not work in France. But I was curious enough. I went home that summer to visit my family, and I was able to find a TPRS workshop in St. Louis. And I went for 3 days. And at the end of 3 days, the teacher who was doing the workshop was teaching us Swedish. At the same time, she was explaining the method to us and demonstrating the method. And at the end of 3 days, she told us a story in Swedish, which we all understood and were able to answer questions about.
Wow.
She gave us an article written in Swedish that was a full page. You know, we read the article and understood it and were able to answer questions about it.
Oh, really?
And then she gave us a list of 100 Swedish words, asking us to tick the ones we could translate. And almost everyone in the group could translate from 95 to 100 of the words.
Wow.
And so that was very impressive. And I continued trying to find out more about this method and seeing how I could apply it in my teaching. And I also later went to an international forum on language teaching. So I began to apply it in my own classes, and I could see the difference. I could see the effect in my own classes. And so I wanted to make this available to teachers in France so that they wouldn't have to go all the way to the United States for training. And I began in 2013, the first Agen workshop. And there were 15 people, and you were one of them. And it's grown and grown. In 2019, there were 120 teachers. Last year, we were online, and there were over 300 teachers. This year will be in person. It will not be online. In the language labs, the idea is to have the teachers observe a teacher working with real students, or being one of the students if they wish. And this is why we ask people who are new to the method to go to the Breton class. Because if you already speak French, it's easy to learn Spanish because they are Romance languages.
Yeah.
But Breton is a Celtic language, or Daniel might say Celtic.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't help you to already know either English or French or Spanish. And so when we put students in that class, they experience the method as a student experiences it. And they're usually very, very quickly convinced that this is a very effective method. So people who come to the language lab, they get 15 hours. It's an intensive course, if you like. And so they get 15 hours of instruction. This year we will be offering Breton, English at 2 levels, an intermediate level and an advanced level. And we will be offering Spanish and French as a foreign language.
Okay. So if people would like to come as a student or as a teacher, perhaps I could put a link under the video so they can connect with you and find out more about it.
The dates are July 26th to July 30th. It's the last week of July. We are always the last week of July.
And I'm looking forward to seeing you again there because I'll be coming with my daughter. I think we're doing Spanish this year. Okay. Well, it's been really lovely chatting to you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed seeing you again and talking to you.
Take care of yourself. And
I'm looking forward to seeing you the last week of July in Agen.
Exactly. See you soon, Judy. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.